Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We are live with the Measured Path and Sabria Mills. I'm going to first be copying and pasting the live so that everyone can get a chance to come in. This is the Superheroine podcast recap, and I'll explain a little bit more about how it works in a second. Um, See people coming in. Assalamu alaikum. If people can just give me your salam so I can make sure that everything is working, that you can hear me clearly. And inshallah, soon Sabria is here. We're going to bring her in soon. But first, make sure that you're copying, that you are spreading this broadcast on your pages so that we can get the optimal viewership. And we'll go from there. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And while I'm doing that, share. Let's see. While I'm doing that, if everyone can just tell me where you are tuning in from, just give me a shout to where you are actually tuning in from. I love to hear when people are coming from all places to share. Just let me know where you're coming from as I share this. So now, okay, looks like I'm pretty much ready. Okay. All right. Wa alaikum salam, Sadia. Wa alaikum salam, wa alaikum salam, wa alaikum salam. All right. So before we get into the conversation with Sabria, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background in how this started. So a couple of years ago, before COVID, and before we ever knew COVID existed, I had this inspiration to study the story of Miriam. Actually, what happened was I was talking to a friend in the UK, and this friend told me that she was teaching a class, and the class, when she mentioned Maryam, they didn't know who Maryam was. Like the class, this was a Muslim class, they were born Muslim, they didn't know who Maryam was. And at that time I think I just made a song about Maryam, right? So I was so flabbergasted, I was so surprised about it. It made me kind of research, and I started hearing that people were I started hearing that a lot of the young people were not, and people were scared to kind of talk about Maryam because they didn't want to make it confused with Christianity. And I thought, man, this is a major mistake. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us such an example in Maryam. So what I did was I decided to go on a journey to actually learn, first to study her story myself, right? And I'm going to get into more of that. But first, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to bring in Sabria. I'm going to give you a little bit of her bio, and then I'm going to bring her in. So Sabria Mills is a social advocate and educator who partners with educators, community leaders, and activists to advocate for inclusive spaces for marginalized voices. After spending nearly a decade working in education and addressing the needs of nonprofit organizations, Sabria continues to advocate for marginalized individuals across the city of Atlanta. In addition to her advocacy work, she currently works as a journalist for an international publication and owns a podcast called the Dope Muslim Women Podcast. Her work as a journalist focuses on amplifying the voices and experiences of Black American Muslims. So before we go in, we're going to radiate your light, show your faith, inspire, show your strength so big, show your heart sincere, hold your in one, give your soul to God, He will raise you much, show your praise. And assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How you doing, Sabria?
Wa alaikum salam, Khalil. How are you, bro?
Very good, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
first of all, I wanted to bring you in the middle of actually while I was telling this story, because what you addressed yesterday actually uh, was very linked to the motivation behind creating this program, which is more than just a podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I was looking at and I was kind of studying her story, one of the things that I gathered from it was that how much she was an example for us, for men and women, and how she guarded herself. Right, that was one of the things that stuck out to me, and how she was very guarded. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I want to do first is I want to talk about a little bit about why you're here and why you're on the first one. So um, Sabria has been doing the Dope Muslim Woman podcast for a while now, and I've been, an honored guest on it for a number of times. And one of the things that I realized when I when we were doing these things, one of the things that I felt like, okay, we have some cohesion here, is we both really are focused on the village and the people, and not so much from a standpoint of how do we help the people, how do we help, ourselves and help the people, right? And so uh coming off the backs of the story of Halima. So this podcast actually started 2 years ago, and Halima de Oliveira, the person who inspired the podcast, was a born and raised Muslim who left Islam. Right, she left Islam as a young person, very frustrated with what had happened. Right, and in a lot of ways, when you really think about it, there was a chink in the armor of the village. Right, and which had kind of led to the frustration. She ended up coming back with a very inspirational story. But I wanted to get into before I go more into that, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is, Halima had a major story of redemption, and she kind of all the way left practice, and then came back. Do you have any stories for yourself where you might not have left as far, but you considered it, or you had a really a low point where you didn't know whether you were going to make it?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, sound like everybody. Can I just say that it feels great to be on this side of the couch? I'm sorry, I just had to add that in, Khalil, before we get too deep.
Right.
Mashallah. But I appreciate being here on this platform, and I did have the pleasure of actually watching the episode with Halima de Oliveira and listening to her inspiring story, but just the authenticity of that struggle. And one of the things I was reflective about with my own experience is just that, usually typically, with women, our faith and our hearts, our emotions, they're so intertwined. So a lot of times when we struggle with faith, it has something to do with those emotions, those hearts. It could be a heartbreak or such. So for me, I never left Islam, but the times where I had questions in my faith, where I didn't know I was going to make it through, was times where I experienced massive heartbreak, right? Loss, right? One of the tests that we have as women, and I've learned that through my own experiences with divorce and loss, is that our emotions are a test. We tend to want to connect ourselves sometimes to that external being, whether it's our husband or it's the object of our affection. And when that's broken, it sometimes tends to break us. That's why there's something that says to break the woman, and Khalil, help me out. To break the woman, she's like the bent rib, and to break the woman is to divorce her, right? Is to right. So it's like it's a brokenness there. So for me, when I went through my divorce, and I didn't just only go through a divorce of losing a husband that I love, but I also lost friends and I lost family members. The relationship with my father was strained. I really questioned, or had had a fall with faith. I didn't know if I was going to make it through at all. And I think Halima's story, she has a similar experience as it relates to her hijab and such. But yeah, mine was deeply attached to heartbreak and my relationships with men, to be honest
with men.
like, just to keep it a whole buck.
Yeah. So I guess in keeping with that, was there any specific was there a moment, where you were like, I don't know if I can do this, right? Or was it kind of a combination of things where, some people, there's a moment. For other people, it's just they just find themselves in a place that they didn't know they'd be.
Yeah. It's sort of like the buildup. I would say it's the buildup. It's really
Mm-hmm.
like when you begin to question. See, this is the thing, and it really goes back to where we place our value. As Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gives that to us, right? We don't have to go and earn it from an external force. But a lot of times, if we're not cultivating that relationship with constantly on a constant basis, that spiritual relationship and that connection to Allah, we tend to attach our value to external things,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's the idea of when you attach your value, say, for example, I attach my value to being a wife, right? Being a
Mm-hmm.
wife, like that's where I felt like I was of value.
Mm-hmm.
When that is shattered,
Mm-hmm.
then the idea of having a faith and strong connection to God, all of that shatters, because now you don't you're questioning your identity, who you are, and I think a lot of women experience that. If you notice with the epidemic of divorce, there is a trend of a lot of women, and I know brothers go through their own struggles, but they're able to hide it a little bit more. It's a little bit more hidden. But for us, it's a little bit more overt, especially if we wear the hijab.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of, women, when they experience, especially a devastating heartbreak, you
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you see that pattern of where the
Mm-hmm.
faith tends to be tested. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Walaikum salam, everybody.
Like a
But
salam, everybody. Thank you for
yeah.
coming on. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you something, Khalil,
Sure.
and you have to forgive me for going into question mode, but I
That's
love
cool.
dialogue. But
Yeah.
as men, right?
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
talk about faith, do you guys also understand as brothers the impact of I guess your relationship with your wives and the women in your care, the impact of sometimes even breaking that sort of bond has on a woman and her faith? Or do you feel like is that something that is a conscious awareness
I don't
of?
think we are fully aware of it. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think, if I'm
Mhm.
honest, I don't think that we are aware of how much it plays a role. I think it's something we have to learn. You know,
Yeah.
um, I'm not quite sure all the reasons why either. But you asked that question, and if I'm honest, no, I don't think we're aware. You know, we're not groomed to be aware. I'll say that.
Mhm.
you know, um,
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot hearing a lot of that as a child. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
when I think about it, and we what I did hear a lot is, as a man's man and the son of a man's man is protection, right? But I think we always talked about protection from a physical standpoint, right? And from a
Mhm.
being strong, from a being strong outward standpoint, right? I don't recall being taught a lot about how to be strong inward. That's something that I had to really kind of learn. I'm still learning, right? Because most of, when I really think about, that what you're talking about, and the breaking of a woman, a lot of it has to do with our ability to have sabr, right? And ability, and that's the strength. That's the strength thing, And I don't, and it's something that you know, I tell you what, I'm still learning.
It's the battle of the ego.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's a whole nother
yeah,
discussion. Yeah.
yeah. So I wanted to ask, back to you. Do you have a shahada moment, like a moment where you reaffirm, where you, okay, all right, this happened, that happened, but it's
Yeah.
time to reaffirm my faith?
I would say many times during my life,
Hmm.
definitely. I mean, there were times, even just growing up Muslim, I know you and I were both born into Islam, but there was a time when I was about 12 years old where I made that conscious decision to take the Shahada. And then at that point, it's like, okay, the 5 daily prayers and everything's serious. Ain't no skipping and trying to dodge out in the half wuzus anymore. Um, like, a
Hmm.
lot of us did growing up.
Hmm.
But that was sort of that point. But Definitely, I would say definitely in my journey of loss and heartbreak during the times where it was very difficult to get up and pray. I was slow to prayer.
Yeah.
I was very slow to prayer. I still tried to maintain it because it had been such a habit for me throughout my life.
Mm.
But it was more just out of habit. But it was very difficult for me. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of his mercy, when he pulled me out of that and he really was able to, kind of expand my breast to be able to see what was on the other side of it, at that point I had to reaffirm. At that point I had to make a decision. I'm going to walk on the path of Allah. He's opening up this door for me, or am I going to stay stuck? Or am I going to keep kind of spiraling to the point of where my faith is completely lost? So I did have to reaffirm, retake that shahada, retake that, sort of commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this faith. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, very similar. I would say the same thing multiple times. Um, the same kind of thing where, for a while you're dealing, even the prayer thing, which is another reason why it's a good segue into another reason why why I decided to do this program around and in honor of Mariam, because, Mariam was the one who guarded her prayer. And when I read about her story, I didn't read it from a standpoint of a woman. I read it from a standpoint of an example to all of us. Right. And Allah gave her many names that actually that showed that she exemplified someone who was prayerful. You know what I'm saying? And one of the things that I've learned about us as men, especially, I think that sometimes we aren't, as diligent, even as our women folk in that, and we have to. Our spirituality has suffered a lot, and in her example, there's much that we can learn from. So I'm gonna give a couple things that again that made me that was interesting about the journey of learning about her. And if you have any comments or you want to bring something in, I'm going to let you speak. Right, just interrupt me. So, one of the things that I noticed is that the men that Allah made it such that the men were honored to take care of her, right, as a woman, and it wasn't about marriage. Right, so so the men were honored, so they literally draw lots, right, and they're honored to take care of her because they see her as a honorable woman, right, and a special woman, and Allah makes it such that they all want to do it, and then Zachariah ends up winning. You know what I'm saying? What say you to something like that?
I mean, I just think it's fascinating, and I deeply appreciate, because we often do not hear this component aspect of the story enough. You know what I mean? I can't remember the last time I heard it from the minbar or something in regards to, especially the way you described it, as it wasn't attached to marriage. Imagine that, dear brothers, that she could somehow support the poor, forsaken sisters out here, as you guys like to describe, without marriage. Wow, I mean, it's amazing. No, but seriously, subhanallah, I think it goes to, I do think it goes to show you that, first of all, within the Quran, within these stories, you really have a guide and a way in which you can live, right? And there's so many examples, and there's so many paths. And that's the beautiful thing about this deen. But also, just as a woman that has had experiences in times of feeling unprotected, and to be honest with you, not being able to trust the brother that claims he wants to protect, because you don't know, I mean, that's just the dynamic in which we live. But again, one thing I've learned, subhanAllah, is that there are actually a lot of brothers out there like that. There are actually a lot of pure intention brothers. And I think it's important as women that we begin to clean the lens in which we decide to look. It's our decision. It's our decision how we decide to look at the collective of our brothers, especially within our Black community, because we have why I do the Dope Muslim podcast. We have a very antagonistic relationship between Muslim men and Muslim women as it relates to many issues, which is why I always have men and women, on the show. But what I've learned is that if you decide to clean the lens, you can actually see manifestations of what you just described. It's a choice. So
right. Well, alhamdulillah, I'm glad that was mentioned without me having to mention it. I can be appreciative of that. Because I do see that, and like I said, I mean, there's even been times where what actually happens is that when a man is helpful, and Allah showed that in the story of Yusuf, sometimes he gets in trouble. You know what I'm saying? So there's that side that nobody talks about much. But I did want to mention.
Hold on. You can't
uh,
slide that in. I'm so sorry. No, what did you mean by that? As you said, so when brothers
Meaning.
get in trouble, because Yusuf, that was a situation in which he was, the sister tried to seduce
Mhm,
him.
mhm, mhm.
So is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to a
Well,
different type of trouble?
I know I'm referring to the concept of the man being there to do his duty, and then um, getting in trouble for just wanting to do his duty, and not wanting to do more than that. Just to balance out the conversation that where people always can tend to talk about the men who just want the other thing. I mean, it's
Fair.
I bought that out. I bought that out first because that is a problem. Like we do have to fix our lower us as men, no doubt. First, matter of fact, we are first and foremost. I'm always going to the first responsibility is us, right? First responsibility is us. Allah made us as Qawam, and that's the bottom line. That's the way it is, right? But I just mentioned that, just to balance it out a little, just a bit, just a bit.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but going back to it, the next thing that I would say that stood out to me about Maryam. Look at comments now.
I want
People
to
are
know
funny.
who did the
I know,
emoji
I
thing.
know. Like I
Because I'm
can't
like, I
see.
need. I see when I'm doing my lines, Khalil, just
Right.
I
Hmm.
know I'm interrupting you, but when I do my lines, when they do that, I be like, y'all got to explain that.
You got to
We ain't
explain
moving
why you
on.
had that
Why you
facial
got that
expression, right?
emoji? You can't just.
Right, right.
Go ahead,
Um,
brother. I'm sorry.
the next thing though that again that I think that Mariam did that stood out to me that I took note of was that Mariam, and this is in keeping with what you talked about yesterday, is that
Mm,
Mariam when Mariam was visited by the angel who came to give her tidings, the first thing she did was she sought refuge in Allah
mm,
because she didn't know what his intentions were. So
mhm.
so she sought refuge in Allah. Now, usually when men come in, I mean, angels come in the form of men, they're usually, very attractive, men.
Yeah.
But an interesting thing about it is that, um, and I'm gonna tell you, this is the same thing, kind of what Yusuf. I made a parallel because again, Yusuf did the same thing
Mm,
when he was actually when somebody who had bad intentions, right,
mm,
came at him, he sought refuge in Allah. In
absolutely.
Maryam's case, the person had good intentions, but she still saw refuge in Allah. And
Absolutely.
so the common denominator is what? When we were faced with things where we're not sure about, right?
Hmm.
When we're talking about staying and are not even coming close to that thing that Allah said don't come close to, the first thing is what? Seek refuge in Allah. Seek
Yeah.
refuge in Allah, right? And so that was one of the things that I saw. Now, and then when she realized, okay, who it was, okay, okay, mashallah. And then, of course, the actual relationship with, like I said, with the prophet Zachariah, where he's coming in, he's giving her food and stuff, and they're having an exchange, and then they're going back. He's going about his business. So again, now we're talking about that relationship,
Yeah.
between a believing brother and a believing sister, right? And we've had multiple conversations about that, right?
Yes, we
Um,
are.
that story inspired me really a lot, and I did that a couple years ago, again, about the fact that this is supposed to happen this way. Can you talk a little bit more, expound a little bit more about that relationship that we must, like, do you think from a village standpoint, right, that are we going to get there if we don't actually have the ability to have these types of relationships on a regular basis, and where people don't suspect other people when that's the case?
Yeah. So this is one of those discussions, and you know that because we've had it. That's dicey.
Mm-hmm.
That's dicey, and it's sensitive because there's a lot of aspects to it in which we have to consider. Um, you know, um, be- because when we talk about the relationship between the brothers and sisters, we still have to, like you said, that seeking that refuge. There still is the responsibility that we have when we're in the presence of non-mahram men, and vice versa. Like with that is there's some parameters already set in place. However, one of the things I love, one of my favorite, women from the life of and the Sira is Nusayba, and the reason why I love Nusayba is because yeah, she didn't allow her modesty in which she embodied, her
Mm-hmm.
modesty, her hayat, stop her from being on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that means she would approach the prophet, she would approach the companions. She made, her voice was very, you know what I mean, like it wasn't silenced, right? And you know, with that showed me is that there is a proper way to go about it. Those relationships though are necessary in order for society to function properly. It
Mm-hmm.
you know, for us to have these completely separate, you know, sort of society, and then wonder why we have these marriages that lack connection. We're raising children that are void of sort of purpose and alignment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we have not cultivated with a balanced society. So there is a lot, I think, of work that needs to be done. On my side as a woman, though, it's why I say it's very sketchy is because women who may have platonic or healthy relationships, even if it's in the business realm with men or brothers, there's a morality aspect. Her morality then tends to come in question. We know the story of Aisha from our Sunnah. I know you cover that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A very prime example of one of the mothers of the believers, very innocent example of, and it's a beautiful example because it shows just by something that visibly, you know, it did look a little, it was a little question mark around it. It's, you know, it's no doubt about that. But how that the tongue, you know what I mean, can like how that can just cause so much harm and damage. And we do that to women all the time. I've been a victim of it all the time. I've got to a point where, you know, I don't, you know, really, you know, it doesn't bother me as much. But as you know, it used to really break me because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know, your morality like is a question, and you know, so it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing, but
Yeah.
we have to do better
Yeah. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
it, and we have to be reminded of these stories, Khalil, like because
Yeah.
they're important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's you know I think you know, and somebody said the tongue can cause so much damage. Yes, it's absolutely true. Um, um, and I was going to get into this a little bit later, but I guess it's you know while we're you know we hit it while it's hot, right? Um, you know, I think that um in this social media age, you know what I'm saying, and what I've learned is that if you care a lot, and you know, women tend to you know be the ones who care and the nurturers more than men, but there are some men who care and the nurturers. The more you care and the more sincere you're trying to be, the worse you're going to be hurt or destroyed by the tongue. Uh-oh, I lost her. I lost Sabria for a second. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Are we
You all
back?
right? You good?
I'm
You good?
good. Am I
Uh,
live? Or I was gonna
yeah,
say, I
you're
said
live
something.
again. You're live again.
Okay.
I don't know what happened. I'm gonna take the
It
blame. I don't know
happens.
what happened there.
It
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. Yeah, so the more that a person is sincere, the more that person is going to be hurt by other people's tongue. Right? And that's what I learned. And, you know, and they used to say that, you know, when they were young, we were younger, we used to hear that phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me well. Allah says in Surah Humazah, he says, woe to every slanderer and backbiter. And Allah promises a very harsh punishment for those who don't come back from it, right? Uh, no, the words and in social media, in the social media age, where all someone has to do is say something, all someone has to do is just make a comment, and a person's world can literally be turned upside down. How do we how do we actually you know get better with it? Because it feels out of control. It actually feels out of control right now.
It absolutely is. I think that we have to go back as a people. First of all, you know, one of the things is that, like, just specific to the Black community, and first and foremost, as we look at some of the historical um, remnants of slavery, us being pitted against each other, and all those sort of things that we're sort of just kind of purifying ourselves, cleansing up from, you know, we kind of have accepted it. You know, we've come into Islam, alhamdulillah. But one of the things that really plagues our community, and it plagues all people, but we don't talk about it enough and we don't call it out enough, which is this ugly envy, hasad. Okay,
Mm,
because when we talk about, because a lot of this, all this things goes back to the heart. You talk about backbiting, slandering, gossip mongering, social media is all out of control. you're right. You do one thing, somebody tries to make it something else. But the root of it, and it has to be called for what it is. It's envy. Because unfortunately, as a result of what has been done to us, and as a result of the patterns in this culture where they just want to pick one of us, the token black, what happens is that we choose survival over sisterhood and brotherhood. Right? Other cultures, they know, because it's been ingrained in them genetically, that in order to elevate and get to where I need to take my family, my community. We all need to help each other to get there. Right? Unfortunately, until what was intentionally done to us, I'm gonna pick one of you guys. Right? The strongest slave makes it out. Right? The prettiest woman makes it, or whatever the case may have you. We still carry that with us. That creates hasad. And the issue with envy as it relates to this is, we relate it to our survival. It's like, I have to destroy you in order for me to survive. That's a serious issue. And until we're willing to call it out, and until we're willing to really be radical, because nobody's free of it, right? And to radically address it and clean it up, we are going to constantly have disunified communities, disenfranchised communities, and the slandering and backbiting. It's not going to end. Try to elevate and see what happens. Try to elevate. Try to walk on your purpose. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs you, the path that He has already instilled in you when you were born. Walk on that path,
right,
and see what happens. And
right.
It's very clear.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah, sorry, that's a little.
No. Go as long as you need to go. It's actually really no, it's really good. I'm gonna stay on this a little bit because now it's important. Actually, one of the most important things of our time, because I think we live in a society where there's billion-dollar industries based off of this very, very thing, and that is you talk about somebody and you make a lot of money, and so we actually think it's kind of cool to do so because that's our culture. It's literally our culture, And it's funny because we stay away from alcohol, but I don't think we realize that actually, the slander is worse. when you slander, especially your Muslim brothers and sisters, actually worse than drinking alcohol. We don't realize that this sin is actually really, really huge. But I wanted to actually, let's just take an example, right? And I want to do this for a reason. So you come to somebody, you hear something about somebody, you hear someone. Let's say they made a mistake, right? And you hear about it for the first time. And one of the things that I've become really, really just I don't understand is that why do we come to our brothers and sisters who are supposed to have a good opinion about first, and the first thing we do is we slaughter them with our words about let's say they actually did, let's say they actually really tried, but everything that you're saying is might be true, right? Why do we come to them? But it could be false too. We come to them most of the time with the assumption of the worst part of it. You X, Y, and Z. You're such and such and such. What's going on that makes us? And is that also what you're saying to be hasad? Like where why are we so quick and so anxious to come to someone and say when we see a chink in their armor, maybe, or what is that? Is that the hasad thing?
Yeah, it's a deeply rooted issue. I think it does relate back to the hasad, but not just that. You have to understand when your identity or your sense of where you come from, who you are, those things that ground you, right? The things that make you unshakable, when that's stripped from you, what are you constantly going to be seeking? You're constantly going to be seeking validation. You're constantly going to be seeking to fill a void. So how can I fill a void, right? I'm constantly seeking it. Sometimes diminishing you makes me feel better. It feeds that little void. So not always envy, but sometimes it's really just about feeling self. If I can make you Khalil, right? If I can make you wrong, and I'm saying, Khalil, brother Khalil, he, I would never, right? I'm essentially what I'm doing is trying to fulfill something. It has nothing to do with you or your mistake. And that's why it's really important for us as a people we have to go back to, because this deen was founded on tasawwuf, purification of self, right? That we're supposed to be in the business of purifying. We're supposed to be focusing here all the time. constantly busy. When I get up in the morning, guess what I after I make my prayers, I go into the mirror. And I have little mirror work that I do, I have that mirror work that I do for my process, but it keeps me focused on Sabria. I don't have time to think about, sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so. I have to, because otherwise that stuff is going to creep up. And another thing, Khalil, when as it relates to Hasad, is sometimes it sits here within us, right? And sometimes when an opportunity arises, it's activated and now we act on it. But in a lot of us, it still sits in the heart. Right? It sits in the heart. But when there's an opportunity, we see it, we act on it. And then that's when we fall into the danger zone. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually made me think of a couple of things I had thought about recently where, oftentimes I find that the people who, one of the trends, I don't know if people in the crowd can kind of validate this, but I don't know if you've ever dealt with a person who considers himself a straight shooter and considers themselves these people who always tell the truth, and they almost label themselves as truth tellers. But then at the same time, a lot of these types of people, and may Allah protect us from being like this, because we're all susceptible to it. So I'm not separating myself from it. Right. But where you label yourself a truth teller, and then I notice that the same person will then be one of the main ones telling you about what somebody else did, and then they put it under the moniker of, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just giving it to you straight. Right. But what's interesting about that often is that they will tend to look so much forward to telling you about the bad of somebody else. Right. And what I learned recently, I think that it's also a form of validation too, because what happens is when you feel like you can ingratiate yourself with somebody else, when you feel like, that person's listening to me and I have a piece of information that they didn't have and they're entertaining it, you know what? It makes me feel better too, or it fills that void for a second. I find that the people who tend to act like they don't need anybody the most tend to have the biggest problem with this. They act like they don't need anybody the most, but then that same person will just go on and on about somebody. And the question is, why are you so harsh and bad about that particular person, except that you do have a void and it probably has to do with your own validation? Have you seen that? Those people who tend to be very hard and harsh about other people, and they talk about that, and they talk about how they don't need anybody, but then it's like, well, why are you, why are you so stuck on this particular person?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a common trend. May Allah make us better. I appreciate you saying. I appreciate you saying how it's all a struggle. We all struggle, and the thing is like we're all tested, at different levels of our faith and at different levels of. And when Allah continues to elevate us, we're tested with different things. SubhanAllah. So may Allah keep us protected. But I think we use a lot of coping mechanisms, Khalil. Sometimes and defense mechanisms to shield us from doing the necessary inner work, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of this, I'm keeping it real. I'm gonna keep it a whole, and I say it too, you know what I mean? But I'm so real, and I'm just telling you the truth. Sometimes that is sort of a mechanism to cover your real intentions, or even just the ability to connect soul to soul. There's a real difference. We all know soul to soul experience. That's why I always talk about connection. And I'm not even talking about on an intimate level. If I'm engaging with you, I'm looking in your eyes, right? You're talking to me. There's body language exchange. There should be a connection there. But a lot of us, because we've dealt with, and even, like I said, on this historical level, our ancestors have dealt with so much pain, Khalil, so much pain and trauma. We're constantly finding coping mechanisms to prevent connection. Because if we prevent connection, right, we're safe from hurt. So a lot of these things are also deeply rooted in that. So it all goes back to the self. And then what happens is when you don't fix yourself, you then develop traits and coping mechanisms that harm other people, and it harms your community. So until you do that inner work, you will, like I said, the community will continue to suffer.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line.
And connected to that, now, and connected to that, and connected to overcoming adversity. I find that in our communities, a lot of what happens is if a brother or a sister feels like they failed in some kind of way, right? Be that marriage or be that some type of relationship or really be that a real mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's 10 times harder to actually kind of breathe in that in the community because of that type of thing we just talked about before. Because of
Yeah.
that, and this is why I stayed on it, because it's actually connected to the village. Because now that there's an environment that's fostered that where there's such a harsh nature towards human beings and humanity and being a human, right? Now, it kind of pushes people away to keep things to themselves or to go off
Suffer in
into some
silence.
other community or suffer. And when you suffer, usually what happens is now we're connecting back to what you were talking about yesterday. A lot of what's happening with the reason why people are acting out sexually and things like that is because it's depression. It's actually a coping. It's the way people cope. It's the way we get away. I can,
Right.
I can feel good for a moment. At least I feel good for a moment, and then we can get away from our own people because we know the judgments are going to be in such a way that and even though we might say, oh, I'm tough, just it's the fact that people are trying to get away from the community and not trying to heal with the community shows how much it actually shows, right? How much hurt is being handed out, right? It actually shows that, because we can talk all day about what we can take, but our actions show that that we will go and cope in a way that's very unhealthy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Well,
so
yeah.
so Halima, actually I'll let you before, because I want to go into what Halima's ascension. But go ahead before you. I don't want
Yeah.
you to lose your thought.
Halima's
Yeah.
ascension is really dope.
Yeah.
Um, I think I lost my thought.
No, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I
You're
apologize.
good. No, you're good. You're good. It'll come
Okay.
back to me. Go ahead. Go into
Yeah,
Halima's
yeah.
ascension.
So Halima talked about, and this is connected because you know somebody like Halima, right? Who
Yeah.
she left, like, but she had Islam still in her heart somewhere, right? It was still there, and Allah blessed her to come back, but she was gone. And I don't know if you ever been. We both grew up in Islamic environments where, boy, you was gonna get it. You was gonna get it bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she talks about, when she talks about coming back, she talks about the fact that the reason why she came back is, she said, Allah says that when you don't use your gifts in a way that's conducive to his, to his reality, in a way that is congruent with worshiping him, then he'll make you forget yourself,
Mm.
right? He'll make you forget yourself, right? And that's why we got to have environments to remind people in a way to get them back. But on the flip side, I'm going to go back to you. You decided to use your journalism career, a large portion of your journalism career, because I know you do, you work with a number of publications to speak on issues that bring us back to remembering the laws with the Dope Muslim Women podcast. Really appreciative of that, doing some really, really good work. Was this an intentional way for you to stay close to your faith yourself? And as well as, I know you want to help people, but was there also a self part of this?
Um, yes, it was intentional. However, one of the things I've learned, and it kind of liberates you in a sense, is that there's no chosen ones. Allah
Mm,
subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed each and everybody with gifts, right? And we
mm,
know we hear it all the time. It sounds kind of cliche. He's instilled certain gifts in each and every one of us. And then you have your purpose, right? How
mhm,
you're supposed to use that gift to ultimately reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's sort of the purpose. All of us aren't supposed to necessarily be scholars, right? All of us aren't supposed to be warriors, right? But each of us have a role, right? And it's our individual path. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why, comparing sorry, could be something
sure.
fell in the background, but
Mm,
the comparisons and things like that aren't even really healthy. um but so what I've learned is that when you tap into what your gift is, right, and then you allow yourself to be grounded enough to understand what your purpose is, it'll be very clear, right, that purpose is in alignment with your faith. Otherwise, if you're
mm-hmm,
a person, if you're a Muslim, it is not your purpose. It is
mm,
not. is something
Mm.
else.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, yes, it is intentional, but at the same time, it's the only way
Mm.
I can actually live. I can walk in my purpose. I can
Mm.
do it. I
Mm.
can live my purpose, and I can do it in a way where Allah
Mm.
subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes moves me, and when I can't move. You know what I mean? Like sometimes
Yeah.
when, I mean, it's the only way, because again, it's created for us to reach him. It's not created so we can make the most money, so we can be the most successful. I mean, I know that that's the Steve Harvey's and all of that. They got half of it right, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the other half is it is designed in us to ultimately reach Allah. And until you're walking that path, you're not actually, um, walking in
Right.
your purpose. Yeah. So
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because it's funny, like being a person who also does music and just does music along with a number of other things, right? Music is one of those things where it's in me, right? It's just in me. It just is, right? I can't,
can't turn it off.
I can't turn it off. Matter of fact, you know, uh, when I go a while without writing, I don't have to necessarily do music. I don't even listen to music most days, right? But if I go a while without writing something, right, I actually I can get sick. Like I can actually get sick from not creating, right? I can get sick from not sharing, right? And so people don't understand that, right? Like people don't understand. Like the funny thing is that when people don't understand it, and I want to move into asking you a question because you spoke about walking in your purpose, right? You being a journalist, and you being a natural person who needs to share. Like talk about. I'm sure. Have you ever had or encountered criticisms where people are saying, well, why are you doing this, and why are you doing this, and why are you doing this way, and they really don't understand. They're like, listen, I can't, like, this is, if I don't do this, I'm probably going to be a worse believer, right? I'm actually going to be a worse believer because it's a part of me.
Yeah. Yeah, subhanAllah. I remember times I would cry at night, or I would cry to like really close friends, and I would say, I wish I wasn't like this, right?
Mm.
Because, and not that I truly wish, but sometimes because the push is so strong and I can't turn it off, it's almost like, my relationships get tested, like everything gets tested. Sometimes I'm in immense pain because I got pushed in another direction, and it caused maybe a fracture here, caused somebody else to be uncomfortable. And I don't want to do that.
Mm.
I want to stay with the people I love.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think when we see people that are on their purpose, and we see different things happening to them, we think that they just, it's about clout. But sometimes you're literally, like you said, if you don't do it, you might even die. Like there's times in the middle of the night, I get up and I can't, like, there's nothing I can do. I can't sleep if I wanted to. The only thing I could do is create. And that's the thing. And it's like, but sometimes I'm like, turn it off. You know what I mean? Because I love my, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing people. You know what I mean? Like I need,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I lost, my marriage. I mean, like really, like it comes at a, I mean, it comes at a cost, but sometimes you have to, go. We know our story of our beloved Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In order for him, in prophethood, he had a lot of loss. He had a lot of loss, and in no way are we comparing our situations, but that there's a message in that, because that was his purpose. That was what the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was created to do.
Yeah.
But he experienced a lot of loss in his elevation. So subhanAllah.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I've been studying the Surah Yusuf for the last 3 months, actually 4 months, right? And one of the things that and that's gonna be the next one I work on. It's so many deep lessons. And Allah says actually in Surah Yusuf that this is in the story of Yusuf and his brothers is a great lesson for everyone. Like it's so profound. We could literally go a year talking about that story, but I'm gonna just say this. One of the things that I saw with Yusuf, may Allah be pleased with him, is that wherever he went, wherever he was dropped, whether he was thrown away or not, he always excelled. So like when he was in jail, he excelled. He ended up being that person who helped, and he was able to keep his gratefulness because he was himself, right? Allah made, when he was a slave, he excelled. Immediately, like when he became a slave, he ended up being like the trusted person to like the prime minister, right? And he ended up in that predicament because he was so trusted by the master, that by his master at the time. So he was with the person's wife, and they weren't even in the same place because he was trusted so much, because that's who he was, right? That's actually just who he was, right?
Yeah.
And what I saw was this unapologetic, I'm going to be a person for Allah. Wherever I am, I'm going to excel. I'm going to be a person for Allah. And you know how they talk about, they like Islam, like sometimes they like to shame us about like telling us about, like someone, like I realize a person can't define for you your humility. Like you actually have to learn it yourself, right? Because in Yusuf's case, when Yusuf got out of jail, he said, listen, you got to put me in this position because I know better about what's about to happen. Right. So he didn't he wasn't like, if it's good for me, then,
Miskeen.
Right. Right. He said, I know who I am. If you want this, and he's coming out of jail with that confidence. I know who I am. Put me in this position so that we can work out. Right. And like I said, so many lessons. Right. But you saying that about that walking in your purpose. One of the things that I will say is that in a lesson for people to understand is that when you see somebody and you see them walking with a different set of talents, gifts, or eyes, seek to if you really have a criticism before you actually do it, seek to understand them or be quiet. Because what you may see on the outside, especially when we're not talking about stuff that's blatantly against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're talking about things where, maybe it's questionable to you, but you don't know. Seek to understand that person, or it's not your business, really. It's still not your business, even if you seek to understand the person. But you don't know that person's struggle. You don't know what they're going through. And let's say in Halima's case, and FYI, we keep mentioning Halima. So for the people who came, this podcast, the first podcast that inspired this one is by Halima de Oliveira, who was a sister who actually we're going to interview next week. Actually, we're going to bring her back on next week on a podcast. I'm going to give you the link to the podcast after the show is over, so you can go listen to it. And I'm going to tell you how we're going to do the show. It's going to be some cool things that we try to do. The point being that Halima, even so, when she comes back to Islam, when she's not in Islam, she's a businesswoman. So she figures out how to be a businesswoman, right? Like she doesn't lose that, right? Yeah. Now she has something called the Boss Hijabi Society. She literally, coaches women, in business, and she let all of it go. Got her Islam back and kept her and retained her identity. So many of us think we have to lose our identity to not practice Islam, right? Talk about that a little bit more, if you can, about that struggle, because you said something, you alluded to that, right? Like, I don't even know if I should be present. Go ahead.
Right. SubhanAllah. No, Halima's a powerful example. I literally remember, watching the podcast and hearing the story, and you're right, which she didn't see, her purpose was always in her. Her gifts was always there, despite her struggles in faith, right? When she lost Islam, she did excel in the business world, but she also had other spiritual issues and depressions and things that happen, and challenges as a result of not being connected, having your purpose aligned with walking your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But once that sister aligned in, her faith back with her purpose. Now look, come on, Sister Halima de Oliveira, I interviewed her myself, and that podcast was like crazy, because when she speaks, you listen, Allah gave her a gift. It's just that simple, and she uses it, and she walks in her purpose. May Allah bless and elevate her. Yeah, exactly. So it's that same thing. And even, I challenge sometimes, when you're actually trying to walk in your purpose, and again, you just literally, all you have to do is sit quiet and do and go inward. A lot of people are like, well, I don't know what my purpose is, or I don't know what my gift is. All you have to do is get a bit quiet. We are in the habit in this society of noise. But how did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam receive elevation in solitude, in stillness? It was quiet.
Yeah.
That is, if you don't know, or if you're confused, that is the key. You have to go inward, and you have to be in that sort of seclusion cave. Think of it in that way, in order to tap into it. And I promise you, by Allah, that it will come to you, and you will understand it a lot more. But the powerful thing about it, subhanAllah, is that, when you are actually walking that path, even if you experience devastating heartbreak,
Mm-hmm.
devastating heartbreak,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of us lose our identity. A lot of us lose our faith. A lot of us let go our purpose, right? But if you are really aligned, like I said, if you can align your purpose with your faith, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what atrocities happen to you, you
Mm-hmm.
will never lose your purpose. You will keep walking, but it has to be aligned to faith.
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
not aligned to faith, you're going to lose it.
Yeah. 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 And speaking of that,
So,
I think that speaking of that, uh, that kind of alludes to the work, right? And so speaking to that, Mariam did a lot to keep her
yeah.
honor and her
Hmm.
integrity. Like, she was, honorable woman, and she believed in that, right? Then Allah tested her with the prospect of being seen by the public as the most dishonorable, especially at that time. In that, she comes out with a baby, without anyone knowing her to be married, right? Um, and she struggled with this concept at first because, you know, that honor thing is a big deal, man, especially with women, right?
Serious.
What as a public figure,
About to say, what you
you
about to
know,
ask me, Khalil?
as a public
What are you?
figure,
What about?
as a
I'm a.
public figure, I want to know, like, I just want to know, um, how has it, at some point you had to face it, you ever had to put no beforehand? I'm about to deal with something where I'm going to have to put my reputation on the line, but I have to deal with the greater good. And how'd you deal with it?
Um. Yeah, of course. It's the Dope Muslim podcast. So it's issues driven podcast. The premise of it is we do a lot of issues that make people uncomfortable. We have guests that make people uncomfortable, and we cultivate conversations between men and women. And anytime you're creating that sort of dynamic, um, you're gonna have people that question that or try to look at it in a lens that makes it immoral. This is a sensitive topic because I feel like you said, honor is so important to us
Hmm.
as women, and I think that also, you know, uh, I would say that the struggle sometimes is a woman to woman relationship. And that's the relationship that I love the most, which is why I created the Almost Woman podcast. But
Hmm.
it's the woman to woman relationship. It can be a struggle as it
Hmm.
relates to, I often get a lot of phone calls, as it relates to certain guests, as it relates to something that I said or did, a lot of implication, things like that. It usually always comes from women. It's
Mm.
usually like 100%. I mean, it could be just because, they feel more comfortable to share. But
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is that
Mm.
that just tends to be the thing. Um, and so I just think, we have to be a lot more mindful of our the way we see each other. The way
Hmm.
we see each other is really, really important. But
Hmm.
I think that that's always going to be a problem in our community, because I think that what we don't and what we talked about on the podcast when it comes to sexualizing, we talked about taming the sexual beast on the Dope Muslim Woman yesterday, but we've have an over sexualized history. Like I said, we've been over sexualized here in this country, right, as
Hmm.
Black people. And
Hmm.
then in Islam, sometimes we tend to, when we look at sort of gender relationships, we look at it in a really over sexualized way, and sometimes it really is unnecessary. It's not balanced,
Yeah.
and we can kind of create these sort of like, oh my gosh, there's a woman, and it's like
Yeah.
we just sort of see sex, and that has to be reframed and restructured as
Yeah.
well. And a lot of Muslim women, we're kind of fighting back against that. We were sometimes, some of us were raised that way.
Mm.
We had to be quiet, silent, so we don't, spark the desires in brothers. We know what our responsibility is, but some of it is to the extreme, right? And so many of us are pushing back in the sense of where and on some of that doesn't align with
Yeah.
our sunnah and the way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged us to be as women. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, as a man, I would say, and I know men who are like this too, but I think that, in in this day, because I think our Father's Day was a very different generation, but in this day, I can actually say that I felt a lot of that myself too. Like where, where there's something that I'm trying to do or something that I'm trying to accomplish, right? And it's like it's relegated or lowered. My intentions are lowered to, you know what I'm saying, to this. So this is what you are, and this is what you're about, and it's like it's like, and the crazy thing is, it's a helpless feeling because it feels helpless when someone says that about you, and for sure you ain't in that space,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I guess that makes sense why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, especially he talks about how the person who accuses the chaste woman, he really literally makes it he literally has a rule about the accusing of the chaste woman. It's a big deal. You know what I'm saying? It's a big deal. But then, like I said, it's interesting also that he, he had the time that, like, he also gives a story where, the man is accused and the man has to go to jail. And one of the other things I've been looking at recently is that in the cases where men have actually been accused and they've been falsely accused, they kind of they always end up in a position where they kind of have to just wait on the law to actually, just to reveal whatever the truth is. Men and women, actually, where they have to wait on Allah. Allah gives multiple situations, and this is something I just pay attention to a lot, where the man and the woman is accused, whether it be Aisha, be Maryam, whether it be Musa for another reason, or Yusuf, right? And every situation, Allah is like testing them. And you know what I realized about that is that this has to be a purification of our attachment to people and to what people think.
Absolutely.
Because when you're in that space, it's helpless. Like Aisha was helpless. Aisha was like, and her husband, who was the prophet, is literally wondering what happened. He's not sure. And come back to it. Yeah. So her husband is like not sure, and she's literally, and by the end, she can't even call him the way she normally calls him. It's literally just Allah. It's literally just Allah. And Allah brought it out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought it out. And I can imagine that even though as painful as that was for her, and man, that had to be excruciating because their connection, is probably times a million anything we ever felt because of who they were, who Allah made them. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was purifying her even more. But after that, I can't imagine the strength she must have had afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. SubhanAllah. Yeah, right. MashaAllah. I mean, everything that we experience, like I said, you don't know what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has on your path. And there are some things that he tests you with to prepare you for that next sort of stage. Right. So some people may look at somebody and say, "Oh my gosh, they went through a divorce, and that ain't gonna be me." But it's like, SubhanAllah, that person's divorce might have been their whole elevation, right? Yeah. They may have needed that level of pain to strengthen up. They may have needed that trial and tribulation. That's why I don't get on the bandwagon of, the scarlet letter on people that have done some sort of community wrongs. People want me to, because they feel like I'm supposed to out people in the community that have done wrongs. And I'm sorry, I don't do that. That doesn't align with what I personally believe about people and about my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes you do go through trials, you do make mistakes, you do stumble, but sometimes Allah can elevate that person even higher. You have to be careful with your mouth, because you could be saying something against someone that Allah has elevated, that Allah has taken as a friend, as a wali. You know what I mean? We don't know. So it's like, it's better to be really cautious of the tongue. SubhanAllah. But yeah, that's a beautiful reflection. We don't often like to talk about it because it makes people uncomfortable, Khalil. So I do want to just offer you some gratitude for bringing that type of issue, or that type of issue up. I myself don't even like to broach it because it does make people very uncomfortable, because it's such a common practice. But we also don't. It's one of those common practices we don't like to talk, like, one of those things we don't like to talk about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good point you mentioned, where Allah might be using the very thing that everyone is looking down on to elevate that person, because that person needed to fall in that way so that they can go up. And so and literally as you're speaking about their downfall, they're rising, and because you're speaking, you're falling. You know what I'm saying?
I've seen it a lot. And it's interesting. If I could say this, is really interesting. But I think also one of the patterns I found, is especially when people kind of are in a race some people are in a race to elevate for whatever reasons. I mean, those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maybe elevates their station, they don't sometimes even want to wear that crown. They don't want to carry that because the weight is so heavy. You're like, yo, I'd rather just go chill with my kids and have a happy life with my husband or my wife, like that'll be a lot easier, subhanAllah. But there's some people that are on such a race to elevate. And one of the things where you go wrong is that sometimes you're busy looking at this person, that person. Well, let me outmatch. Let me do this better. I can do it better, and a lot of times that's the downfall. It's like you missed the, you know what I mean? You're trying to figure out how to outdo them, but that's it. You just fell into the trap because your elevation will never come at the expense of somebody else's downfall. It will never. Try it. I guarantee you. Try it. I promise you, it won't be successful. It will never come. Your elevation has to come with you elevating others with you. That's it. That's what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. He could have just took his awareness of God and went to the cave and been a saint, right? But his elevation came because he took his people with him. And a lot of our messengers, I mean, that was their call, but we don't elevate without that. We don't go alone. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. That's a really good segue to the close to end of our conversation. I wanted to ask you if you could give the crowd, especially, as a person, everybody kind of goes through the same thing, but when you're in the public eye, you probably go through it a little bit more. What are some tips for maintaining worship during these distracting times? Maybe something that you could share that can be helpful to people while they're distracted. And especially, the truth is, even with the tongue, like a lot of times people come to us, especially people that we're close to, it's actually very difficult to not sit with that, not sit in that and listen to that and then engage in it, because it's not about the subject. We want to actually just engage with in love with the people that we love the people that we're talking to often. And so we end up making that mistake. Being a person who, who talks about how, you've been on the other side of that, how, if you have anything, and then also with respect to faith in general, how do we maintain a standard of guarding ourselves from falling into that place?
Yeah, subhanAllah. Just to relate first to the spiritual practices, I mean, we know the basics. So the basics have to be in place. But I mentioned that cave of Hira. I think it's really important. We don't do seclusion enough. Those that are really are in a very serious practice of spirituality, of tasawwuf, of purification, they usually participate in seclusion. It's the part, we know that's a part of Ramadan. So there's something with it, right? It is my personal belief and my own experiences that is one of the openings to you being able to unleash your gift and unleash your purpose, and to be able to live a life that feels in alignment, like that you feel aligned. Not that it's all happy, cheery, and everything's going great, right? But you're having an internal peace like that, and that is worth everything. You can't do that without seclusion. So the best advice I have is that stillness, that quietness, that seclusion, and Allah offers us the time, like tahajjud, to take advantage of that. But you have to quiet the noise, and you know where the biggest noise is right here, right? Yeah. It's right here. Yeah. You have to actually quiet that down. That's a practice. That's a skill to actually silence that. And then you get, because otherwise this is going to overstate with, that kind of spiritual awakening that you're having. The second part of your question, I think, was remind me, Khalil. The second part of that question, that last thing you said was
I guess the second part is actually just about guarding ourselves
oh, yeah,
from the
guarding.
thing, from the
Yeah.
thing, from the very alluring prospect of someone coming to you with some information that you probably don't have no business talking about.
Yeah, you have to make one of the things I recommend is that you have to make, and I journal a lot, right? So in a sense, I write a lot of things down. And so one of the things I write down is my boundaries. And I also write down, I have a coach too that works through them, but I also work through what Sabria stands for and what she doesn't stand for. Right. So you have to be very clear about your boundaries. You have to be really clear what you stand for. Who are you? What do you stand for? So like you may make a decision, a personal decision, as you should, that I am never going to participate in the downfall of another person. Right. Not that we're not going to be tested with jealousy. I mean, we all, like I said, we all are tested with that. You know what I mean? But you have to make a conscious choice to not act and participate in the downfall. So that kind of speaks to when someone comes with you with that, I have to push back. I have to say, well, subhanAllah, I deal with that a lot. I deal with that feedback a lot because of the platform that I run. And I often have to say, subhanAllah, jazakallah khairan, but this is my position, and that's that. This is how we run. This is how I run it. So I'm very clear because I wrote it down. Sometimes we have to, because we fall into those traps like, oh, he did what? Oh my gosh, he left his wife and then went with the young sister down the what? Oh, I thought when I seen her picture on social media that wasn't the wife that he was. Okay. I'm just telling you that's how it goes, right? But you have to be very clear about who you are and what you represent. You have to stand firm in it so that people then begin to know, well, we probably can't bring it to her because she just going, somebody told me like, oh, you just, give everybody excuse. Oh, okay. I mean, that's how you can take it. But I know I had to be very clear about my position because I just think that I never want to remove Buttercup for something that I'm doing because then it is not worth it. Right. In an instance, we're gone. We spend so much time doing things that's like, okay, we're gone and it doesn't matter. All it matters is our deeds. Did we do the right thing? Did we do the wrong thing? Like in a second, it could be gone. It's not worth it. It's not. I don't want to. I'm working so hard. Like I don't want to lose the Buttercup. So to me, it's just about thinking of it in that way as well.
Yeah. Now, I mean, actually, the brother Shahi said you can't elevate from envy, and that's that is absolutely true. It doesn't matter what like really when you think about it, why would you like run from envy? Like if you feel it, actually, literally run away, stop what you're doing, don't respond, get away because he's right. If you actually go on envy, you will fall, you will fail, even if you think you're succeeding, even if you are. Yeah, it's darkness upon darkness, right? So
you would be doing things, subhanAllah, you would be doing things that won't even allow you to sleep easy at night.
Yeah.
And you can't stop.
Yeah.
Because you went into that dark abyss. That's how radical you got to be about protecting yourself from falling into that hole. Because once you fall into it, it's very difficult to crawl out.
Right. SubhanAllah. Yeah. So that's speaking of that, we make sure that inshallah everyone definitely want to remind everyone to say their calls, especially in the morning, especially at night. Say Falaq and Nas and Qul Huwallahu Ahad. Make sure you make that a regular practice. Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did that. It may seem small, but it's everything actually. Our life is about reminders. It's everything, literally. So with that, I do want to thank you for coming on to this this broadcast we're trying to revive from something that started in 2019. I just want to tell people a couple of things about what we intend to do. So to finish what I spoke about with regards to the journey. So after I actually studied the life of Maryam myself, I actually went and found a Muslim woman scholar to actually teach that journey to other people. So Zainab Ansari taught a 6-week course about Maryam, which you can find on the measurepath.com actually now. But inshallah, during Ramadan, I will resume a study group or a group study group where we will actually be able to go through that course together. They're about 20 minutes per session. so we can literally go through it on Zoom together and then have a discussion afterwards. So that's going to be one of the things that we do during Ramadan. This will lead to that. So people can know that. Again, that can be found on themeasurepath.com. The other thing is that uh uh and then I'll let you say if you want to interject while I'm making announcements. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted you to make sure you don't forget about mentioning the song, because somebody asked at the beginning, and I just
Oh,
think the song, because I mean, before this podcast, met you, anything, I'm Superheroine. The song was such a big thing I played for my daughters. Can you also give context? I know it was on the opening, but I just don't want you to forget to mention the actual,
yeah.
why the podcast is born, which is the song that you created.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's what happened. What happened was I made a song dedicated to Mariam because I felt like we didn't have enough. I feel like we always talk about our prophets, and we should, and we talk about our male figures a lot. But the female figures that we have in Islam who are also our heroes, we don't speak about enough as examples and real life examples for today. We tend to speak of Mary, for example, from this place of, almost like this mythical place where we can't actually draw from her life, but we can, like, literally. I mean, she didn't want to be here. She didn't want to live. She faced her reputation being lost. She dealt with her reputation being lost, and literally had to have Allah miraculously, you know, bring her reputation back. You know what I'm saying? So many things. And she was a worker. And when I say that, we're talking about like guarding ourselves. When I say she was a worker, she prayed. She stayed in sujood. She was constantly praying. All the things that we can do. All the things that we can do. So when I made that song, I wanted to bring to light those aspects. The fact that, because sometimes what songs can do is songs can actually, feed people things that they might not actually normally get delivered to them. Right. So the song that you heard in the intro at the beginning, if you didn't hear it and you're back late, you can go look at the beginning after it's over. It's called Superheroine. You can find it actually in Spotify and all the places, like all the streaming places, Apple Music, however you want to do that. And actually, I'm actually the singer on it, not the rapper on this one. But the rapper is really, really good. So,
He's good.
yeah,
Who's
he
that?
really
Is that Kadir?
Al-Kibulan. Yeah, it's
Okay.
Kadir's brother, actually. Yeah.
I thought
So
he sounded like him. Okay.
yeah. So that was what that was. So that's what that was, and I'll post a link to that afterwards too. But yeah, so inshallah, so we actually have a course about Maryam, a deep dive about her life, by a Muslim woman scholar, Zainab Ansari. I'm so ecstatic about that, and I didn't really get to advertise it because of COVID. So now I'm really going to give it the attention it deserves, inshallah, and that's also why we're doing this podcast. So anyone who's in there, I would love for you to join us. We're going to pick a day soon. So what you can do is you can go to, I'm going to actually post a link in the comments. Actually, if you want to go there. The second thing is that when we come back next week, I want to actually add a studio audience component to this, meaning, so instead of doing this, like, we're actually going to have a Zoom where people can come on, and we'll have our future interviewees, and maybe for the first half an hour, 45 minutes, we'll talk. But then if people want to sign up to be in the audience to ask questions directly, they can raise their hand in Zoom and do so. So if you go to this link here where it has the podcast, you can also sign up for the audience or subscribe to the podcast. So I just wanted to tell people that. And then I have one of the things, and then the last thing really is that that's main announcement is that I have, alhamdulillah, I did the Riyadh 2 years ago. Riyadh being, and for those who don't know about it, this big event by Muslims, probably one of the biggest Black American events that happened, started by Black Americans. And I just happened to help with the organizing of it. But alhamdulillah, ever since then, 2019, I've been working and thinking about how to deal with this village thing and this village issue. So in the Measured Path, I've been working on something. I want to make an announcement in a couple weeks. But I've been working on a concept called the virtual village. I can't share a lot now, but it's a concept I've been working on, and it's based off of kind of the sessions that we did at the Riyadh. We cover faith and family. We cover things like what we talk about. But I wanted to take it beyond the talking to steps, actionable steps and things like that. So I've been working on this for the last 2 years. So inshallah, stay tuned for that, because that's going to be something that's like a couple of years in the making. So that's what I wanted to say. So Sabria, do you have anything any last comments you want to say to the people before we get out? And then I'm going to leave people with this one last 99 names reminder that I think I'm working on. Anything for the people?
Yeah, actually, subhanAllah, I just wanted to congratulate you for launching this podcast, Superheroine podcast. I know you've been creating it for many years. And I also, like I said, because I got to see the first 2 episodes, I see the high quality in the content. So I just wanted to first congratulate you for that, and may Allah bless you, and also just offer you appreciation for aligning a lot of the brother podcasters, mashallah, may Allah bless you guys, because just the way that you guys are community orientated, like it's like, oh no, we all together in this. I love the way that you guys go about it, popping on different shows, supporting other platforms. So I just wanted to that's what I wanted to say last. May Allah bless you, and congratulations on launching this, because I know it's been an endeavor for a while.
Yes, well, for a while. Make dua for it, inshallah. Everybody make dua that we're able to actually complete the whole thing this time, inshallah. I have many guests, Dr. Shakira. I have many pre-recorded guests, Dr. Shakira, Nadira Pierre, Dalia Mujahid.
Dalia, I can't wait for that one.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Zainab Ansari.
Zainab Ansari, Asiya Nasser. So inshallah, just stay tuned for that. So I'm gonna leave everybody assalamu alaikum with some links and some comments. And then I have a new initiative that I want to bring everybody into Ramadan with. That's the challenge to learn the 99 names. I did a song and a 5-book series, adults and children's books, 99 names. So this is the little commercial for it. And then I'll see y'all later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Al-Qudus, the holy who can never be replaced. As-Salam, bestower of peace and tranquility. Al-Mu'min, the guarantee. You inspire the faith in me. Ya Allah, you are my life, I need you blessing me. Ya Allah, please grant me mercy as you're testing me.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Khalil Ismail, and there's more where that came from. Join me and take the challenge to spread the learning of the 99 names into Ramadan, inshallah. We can get so many people to learn the 99 names, and guess what? It's already helped thousands of people learn the names. You'll be able to actually get songs, get books, get lyrics, and be eligible to win something grand. Let's close in on Ramadan by learning the 99 names.
The bestower, no one's higher. Al-Razzaq, the provider. Al-Fatah, the opener and judge of judges. Al-Alim, all know.